Hello everyone. This took place the summer of 2022, and I just never thought of writing down this story, because I was so stunned that it happened to me. So every summer in my city, me and my friends like to make small campfires in chill, secluded areas because we don't want to drive an hour to an actual campsite and pay any campsite fee to do so. These also happen pretty spontaneously, so it's a nice last-minute get-together. There's this one spot near my house that's located by a river that's really nice because no one usually goes there. The only thing to be worried about are bears though, because living in the Pacific Northwest is challenging like that. And my house specifically is located right next to mountains and forest. So one particular night at 11 p.m., I decide to go ahead of my friends and meet them at the spot and set things up early, because I want us to be chilling once they all get there. The spot I get to has a 2-minute paved walkway I have to go through, and then I have to take a small trail ramping down the right side of the bridge that crosses over the river. Along this paved walkway is 2 lamps, one located at halfway and another at the start of the bridge. I park my car at the beginning of the trail on the street and bring my campfire stuff like flashlight, lighter, small firewood, small shovel to dig out the pit, etc. I get to the spot, and it's a small, sandy beach kind of embankment on the side of the river with a small waiting area for toddlers and their families during the hot summers. So I set up the chair and I start digging the pit with only my flashlight illuminating where I'm digging. I'm also just shoveling the sand right next to me, nowhere near the water, but all of a sudden I hear a loud splash. A splash so loud that it can only come from something equally large, like a 2-hand-sized rock. I'm confused because I swear I'm not throwing my sand into the water, even though I'm only a few feet away. I shine my flashlight at the water and I don't see anything, so I kind of just brush it off, thinking I'm just hearing things. But as I keep shoveling a bit more, I hear another loud splash. At this point I think something is falling from above because logically something must be falling into the water. I point the flashlight above where some trees are above the river, and I don't see anything big enough to make the splash. So as I keep digging, with my heart rate kinda going at this point, I hear a rustling past the arch of where the bridge goes over the river. I quickly grab my light and shine it towards where I heard the rustling. I call out, "Hello?" No response. In my head, if it was a bear, I should be getting out of there immediately, but there was no bear, or signs of anything for that matter. So I tell myself, I'm just hearing things now because I've seen horror movies before, and now my mind is playing tricks on me. But I hear the noise again, and it clearly sounds like leaves being rustled. So I shine my flashlight over to the area again, and as I focus my eyes towards the illuminated area, I see the naked back of a man hunched over. I was kind of frozen in anxiety and stress because honestly, of all the things I was to see, I didn't think I'd see the naked back of a man. From the quick analysis my brain could muster up, he looked to be mid-40s, shaved not bald, and medium-ish build, like a mix between chubby and built. As I had my flashlight staying on his back, he started to stand up, and the first thing I noticed was that he wasn't wearing any pants either. My next reflex was to start packing up all my crap and getting the hell out of there, because now I'm piecing in my head that he must have been throwing things into the water to scare or shoo me away. So after using my reflexive deductive skills, I proceeded to speed walk out of there with all my stuff. I'm carrying all my things with me and briskly walk up the small ramp, and I'm on the paved path now out of the forest. I can feel my heart beating in my chest, and I am frequently looking back to make sure I'm not being followed. I'm in Crocs, mind you, so I'm hoping that if I have to book it out of there, I'd regret not being in sport mode from the get-go. I make it to the halfway point. A sense of relief starts setting in, knowing I made it safely out of this very scary situation. But as I check behind me for the final time, I see something. Slowly creeping over the ramp is the naked man crawling on all fours as if he was primate walking. His head was positioned towards me, looking at me as he made his way to the middle of the paved walkway. He slowly gets up from his stance and starts standing on his feet, and positions his body to face me. After setting himself into his new position, the man starts running towards me. I freaking book it. I run as hard as I can down the path. My flashlight jumped out of my pocket, and I lost it, but I didn't care because a whole naked-ass man was chasing me at 11 p.m. at night in a secluded forest. I looked back for a split second and the man was still running towards me, still completely naked. He could have my flashlight for all I care. I wanted to make it out of this situation alive. I finally make it out of the forest and I run to my car, which is only 30 feet away from the end of the forest. I desperately get to my car, and like a classic horror movie, I fumble with trying to get my key fob to unlock my car. I actually drop my keys and quickly think to myself, I'm actually dead. But I brush the thought off and pick them back up. I get my fob properly, unlock my doors, and throw my things into my back seat before getting into my car. This felt like an eternity, but in hindsight, most likely took 6 seconds altogether. As I try to guide my key into the ignition, I am fixated on the end of the paved path that I was just at a few seconds ago, waiting to see if the naked man was coming still. I feel my key go into the ignition, and I switch my sights onto the road in front of me, and I zoom out of the area as fast as possible. As I drive away, and I'm a good 30 seconds from the location of the horror that just took place, I get a call on my phone. It was my friends calling me asking if I made it to the spot yet, and all I say to them is, "Guys, do I have a crazy story to tell you?" They pull up to my house because again, it was actually decently close to the campfire area, and I tell them the whole story the way that I told it just now. They swear that it was none of them trying to prank me or anything like that, and I also knew none of them would try to full sprint at me with their dong out. As we're just talking out in front of my house, there's a college student who looks like he's walking home that's going towards the direction of where I encountered the naked man. I just yelled out to him, "Yo, be careful. There's a naked guy that was chasing me by the bridge that crosses over the river." He responds saying, "Oh damn, really? I gotta go over that bridge to go home." All I tell him is, "Good luck, man." The next day I reported it to the police by phone, but they sent over an officer so I could tell them in person and show them where in the area I saw these things. When we went to see where I initially saw the man's back hunched over, they said they didn't see any trace of anyone being there previously, but the officer said they would make note of it anyways in case it happens again. Some friends say it's a skinwalker. Others say more realistically it's either a homeless, mentally ill, or a drunk high person. One theory I've heard my friends say is that it's a future version of me pulling a prank on past version of me, because honestly, if, or when, time travel is real, I would totally screw with my younger self like that. Something told me to go. I've debated posting this for a long time but never got around to it, mainly because I try to keep this memory out of my brain. This is a creepy thing that happened to me about 4 years ago. For starters, I grew up in southwest Saskatchewan in Canada, and moved on to my aunt's farm in 2019 to live in the other house that is on their property. The house is fairly old, but I loved it. It wasn't long after I moved in, though, that I started to feel uneasy in the house alone. I would close every window when it got dark, as it felt like something was watching me through them every night. Eventually, I decided to get a puppy to keep myself company when my boyfriend at the time was at work or away from the house. It helped to have the company, but I always dreaded having to take her outside when it was dark. For a bit of scene setting, our house sat on the left side of the gravel road. At the back of the house there was about 10 meters of backyard, and then there was the cow pasture and the cow barn. We didn't own cows, but in the summer another farmer would rent our pasture space, and so we would have them on the property. It wasn't uncommon at night to hear coyotes surround the farm either, and there were tons. Every so often when I'd go out with my puppy, we'd hear them all around us, too close for comfort. We had a farm dog too, who would keep the coyotes away for the most part, as she was huge, but every so often she'd wander elsewhere on the property to scout, and the coyotes would get a little too close for comfort. They always tried to lure my puppy out to them, but luckily I kept her leashed. Now, one thing you should know about my pup is that it takes her forever to find a spot to go potty. This is still a problem today, 4 years later, but back then, it was the bane of my existence. She would pace for at least 5 minutes, and that was only after finding a suitable spot. Sometimes we would be out there for damn near a half hour, just so she would go. And not go in the house, another problem of hers. Huskies, am I right? On this particular night, it was raining pretty heavily, I was not happy to be out there, and she had decided that she wasn't gonna go until she found her perfect spot. We had already been out for 15 minutes, and at this point, she was also getting frustrated with the rain and wanted to go inside. But I wanted her to go before we went in, since we'd already been out there for so long. So, as any annoyed puppy mother would do, I started getting a little frustrated and would repeat, "Go, go potty," every time she'd get distracted from her objective. It was dark, I was cold and annoyed, and to make matters worse, the cows behind us were fussing fairly loudly. This was out of the ordinary for them. They were usually quiet and sleeping at this time of night. I was also hearing what sounded like a strange bird whistling, but shook it off as probably being an owl. I tried to keep it off my mind as I kept shouting and pleading "go" through the rain to my small, fuzzy, white doggo. I was facing away from the pasture, and suddenly in my left ear I heard it.
Go.
Now, one thing you should know about me is, I have a very strong flight response typically, but this froze me on the spot, as I was mostly confused at what the heck I just heard. I tried telling myself I didn't hear it. I tried telling myself that it was just a moo from a cow that I heard wrong. But again, as if spoken directly behind me, I heard it again.
Go. Go.
It sounded unnatural. It was as if it came from someone who had never spoken a word before. A raspy, deep, monotone go. It almost sounded like it was coming out of an old radio, but of course there were no radios out there. Every time it said it, it sounded the exact same as the first time it was said. And whatever it was had started repeating it, as if it had been taught its new favorite word. At this point, I spun around to the pasture to find nothing there. Then, again from behind me,
Go.
This had all happened in the span of about 3 seconds, and at this point I remember shouting out loud, "All right, don't have to tell me twice," as I picked up my little fur ball and made a mad dash for my front door. I swiftly locked both doors behind me and sat bewildered in my kitchen. Puppy went back to puppying immediately, obviously unbothered by it all, and happy Mum wasn't making her stay out in the rain any longer. I picked up my phone and called my aunt, asking her if my uncle had been out in the field with the cows. She said no, and I explained to her what had just happened to me. She sent my uncle over to the pasture to check it out, but soon after told me he hadn't seen or heard anything. He said he'd check the pasture again in the morning. I spent my night hiding from the windows, with the lights and TV on loud enough to not hear anything outside. The next morning when my uncle checked on the pasture, he found 2 calves dead. Explains the colossal cow panic that had ensued the night before. I regret this, but I didn't push for more information as I honestly just didn't want to know. But they told me other than that they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. A few months later, I moved off the farm. I couldn't be in that house alone anymore, and my boyfriend and I had parted ways. A few months after that, I started going to therapy for the paranoia this had caused me. I started feeling like people were watching me, out to get me. Another few months after that, I moved out of the province for good, and finally felt safe. I'm wondering if any of you here have any idea what the hell this would have been. There's no chance there would have been someone in our field as we were fairly far away from town and neighbors, and we have cameras that would have seen anyone enter our property. Coyotes are common, but I don't think they are capable of mimicking words. This happened when my best friend was 17 and a half and I was 17 in 1996. My best friend Chrissy and I are both smaller females. She is 5'4", and at the time weighed 110 pounds, but was a soccer player, very athletic and strong. I am 5'7", and at the time I weighed 125 pounds. We are both blue-eyed blondes and were often asked if we were sisters or cousins. On the outskirts of her town there is a large reservoir surrounded by a beautiful public park. We figured we'd be fine to walk around in the park because lots of people go hiking there. I had gotten some really good quality weed, and we were looking forward to finding a peaceful place to smoke some out in nature. We chose to go out on a Saturday. It was a beautiful sunny day, and there were not many people there. We parked her car by the reservoir in the mostly vacant lot that had 2 other cars. We did not see anybody when we got there. We walked around the water for a bit, and then chose a trail to go up. It was about 80 degrees out, and we were sweating, but we had some water in my small day pack. As we got about a quarter mile or so into the trail, I started having a weird feeling. I looked at her and quietly asked, "Hey, do you feel something is off here? Everything is really quiet." Where there were usually crickets chirping and frogs singing, it was totally silent. She looked at me and said, "Yeah, I think so." And then we heard some crackling of leaves about 60 feet behind us and a bit to the left. We did not see anybody at that time, so we continued forward. We were both getting pretty nervous, and we heard the crackling again, this time a little bit closer. We still did not see anyone. Each time we would continue forward, we would hear footsteps a little bit more behind us. I thought we were being stalked. There was a turnoff to the left which led to a clearing by a large rock about 12 feet high, with a large, sturdy rope anchored on it to climb up to the top. It was part of a steep hill side of the cliff. The rope to climb it was anchored to the ground as well, so one could not move it. I told her, "We need to get up that rock now. We need high ground." She nodded and went up first with me right behind her. We flew up that rock, clinging to the rope tightly and going as fast as we could. When we reached the top, we turned around to see an older man, probably about 45, with a slender build, wearing a jacket, jeans, and glasses coming into the clearing. He was about 20 feet away. He looked at us with a cold, vacant expression. I got goosebumps looking at him. I shouted, "Hi, will you please leave us alone? We're trying to have some privacy here." He made no response, and with a blank expression slowly started walking towards the rope which led to the top of the rock. My friend at this point was really scared and asked, "What do we do?" I saw a large rock, about 8 inches and almost square to my right, so I grabbed it. I was surprised at how heavy it was, but my adrenaline was going, so I lifted it easily. I told her, "Look around for the biggest rocks you can find, fast. Move them next to us. Hold the biggest one. If that guy tries to come up, we throw them at him and hit him as hard as we can. Aim for his head." Fortunately, there was a pile of sizable rocks behind us to the left, like someone had made a ring to hold a fire on top of the rock, and then moved them away. She brought a few over, and held a large one herself. My friend and I stood close to the edge of the rock, holding our makeshift weapons. I looked down to the base of the rock where the guy was considering the rope. He looked up at us again with very cold blue eyes and no expression. Then he reached his hand for the rope. I shouted loudly, "Do not come up here. If you try to come up here, you're going to get really hurt. We are aiming for your head with these rocks. Get the heck away from us." I held the rock close to my chest so he could see it. My friend was next to me doing the same thing, and we had a pile of more rocks. He blinked his eyes and cocked his head a little bit, then released his hand from the rope, and silently backed away. He backed to the edge of the clearing, backed through the brush, still watching us, and then we heard his crunching footsteps go back through the woods until we couldn't hear him anymore. We stayed on the rock for another 20 minutes, maybe a bit more, watching and waiting. There was no other way to access the rock except for the steep hillside covered with poison oak, so we did not think he'd try it, and plus we'd be able to hear him if he did. After we didn't hear anything for 20 minutes, we decided to make a break for her car. We threw several rocks down to the ground. Mine hit the dirt with a particularly satisfying thud. Chrissy went first down while I was keeping watch in case he came back. When I was scaling down the rock, she was holding a rock getting ready to throw it full force if he returned. Fortunately, he did not. We each grabbed the largest rock we could carry, put a few smaller ones in our pockets for good measure, then headed back to her car on the trail, very carefully and quietly. The crickets were chirping again, so we felt that he had left, but we were still extremely cautious. We did make it back to her car without incident and quickly left. That was the last time I've ever hiked in that park.